The difference between someone who thinks really fast and really clearly is not IQ, but rather how they actively notice and structure information in order to understand how the world works. My response time to questions like,
how do we set the strategic direction for a new product launching in 3 new markets in order to maximize consumer demand and shareholder value?
went from great question to there are 3 ways we can start to break down this question. Let me walk you through them by using some frameworks. How did I get there? I used framework thinking. Frameworks are basically simplified representations of how the world works. So by categorizing and simplifying things down to some key levers, it's a lot easier to problem solve with more clarity. All consulting firms use this approach. Big tech companies like Apple and Google teach their employees how to use frameworks. And of course, in investing, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett are big proponents of thinking in mental models, of which frameworks are a very crucial component. So if you don't study or work in those industries, how do you leverage frameworks to think fast and with more clarity? One obvious place to learn is in books. So I get a lot of questions about which books you can read to learn frameworks. I hesitate to give a list of books because the answer is a little bit more complicated than just get a collection of great mental models and frameworks like this one from Farnham Street. Not that this book is not good, but I'm sure if you bought this book or books similar to this, they end up being really beautiful and collecting dust. And I'm 100% guilty of this. And even though I started reading some of them, in the end, I can't apply them in real life. How do you apply global and local maxima in Dunbar's number in real life? There is a better way of doing this, and it's to follow the way our brain organizes information. So let me show you what I mean. At a very basic level, information is inputted into our brain, stored, and retrieved. Specifically, there are 2 ways the brain organizes information to be more easily retrievable. The first one is sequential memory. So something like a recipe, do the first step, then the second, then the third. This is how we typically take notes as well, in sequence. Now, the second way of retrieving information is relational memory, which is retrieving a piece of information based on multiple cues. So let's say if I say, this thing is red, it's a car. It makes siren noises. It has a ladder and a fire hose. Now, you'll probably retrieve the word fire truck. Now, the thing is, humans actually have stronger relational memory. And that's why taking notes with the Zettelkasten method, where you connect different ideas together, is a lot easier than trying to dump all your notes in one giant Word doc and go from top to bottom. In that way, we're working with the way our brain naturally organizes information. But anyway, I digress. Coming back to relational memory and framework thinking, this means that our brain is naturally geared towards categorizing and simplifying information. And actually, scientists have found that there are 3 main types of mental categories. The first one is visual, like when we talked about the fire truck. If I said red, in your brain there's a library of things that are categorized as red. The reason why that exists is because we don't want to every single time sort through everything that's in our brain in order to find something that's red, right? Instead, we just have one category called red. When we need it, we retrieve it and we double click into it, so to speak. Evolutionarily, this made sense, right? We want to look at a fruit and say, is this edible or not edible? Is that animal dangerous or friendly? Of course, this is not the only way to categorize. The second type is functional categories, which means that they might not look the same, but they have the same function. Instead of grouping by things that look like cars, we can group by transportation methods, right? It could be cars, it could be bicycles, it could be planes, boats, or it could be your ability to walk, crawl, swim. So this is where creativity comes in. How many connections can you make? And of course, that's not all. The third category we have is conceptual categories, but not just any conceptual categories. It's conceptual categories for a specific situation. What I mean by that is, for example, let's say you're going on a trip to Hawaii. Everything that you put in your suitcase is under the category of things I need to bring to Hawaii to enjoy my vacation. So they could have things that look different, that have different functions, right? You could be in your suitcase, there could be bathing suits, your laptop, maybe batteries or something. I don't know what you bring to Hawaii, but they have different functions, they look different, but they are all under the conceptual categories of things I need in Hawaii. Now notice there are no natural categories that's just conceptual, right? We talked about the third one, which is conceptual in a specific situation. So for example, if we got a bunch of frameworks under the conceptual category of math, it's not very natural for our brain to know how to use it. Right? Rather, it's math for a certain particular situation, like math for when I need to split the bill at the restaurant, right? I know that I need to know how many people there are, I need to know if some people are paying more or less. I need to know how to add tips. All of these things need to be contextualized in a certain situation. And that's why learning a bunch of frameworks under a certain arbitrary category doesn't really work. Okay, so if we can't just memorize frameworks, what should we do instead? Well, there are actually just two simple steps you need to do. The first one is actively identify frameworks that already exist in this world. Because we are hardwired to categorize and to simplify our world in order to understand it, we are actually hardwired to think in frameworks, just very naturally. But the problem is, because it is hardwired, most of us are not conscious that we're thinking in frameworks. For example, I already mentioned 3 frameworks in this video. Can you spot them? The 3 frameworks were, number 1, how our brain processes information is input, storage, and retrieval. Then the 2 ways our brain organizing information for retrieval is sequential memory and relational memory. Then the 3rd framework we mentioned was within relational memory, we have 3 types of categories, right? Visual, functional, and conceptual under specific situation. And I got this from books like this. All you have to know is that information is already naturally organized into frameworks. We just need to be aware of them and start to actively identify them. The difference between someone who thinks really fast and really clearly is not IQ, but rather how they actively notice and structure information in order to understand how the world works. Which leads me to step number 2, which is to collect frameworks. Not just conceptual ideas categorized under, a certain subject matter, but rather to a specific situation. This means not taking the categories someone has made for you, but rather to reorganize information so that they fit into categories that work for yourself. For example, there's a book I'm reading right now, which is called The Great Thinkers, and it is organized in the book by subject matter. So you see, it goes by philosophy, political theory, literature, arts, and things like this. Which is fine, except that that is, as we've talked about before, not how our brain organizes information. It's not just by conceptual categories, but conceptual categories within a specific situation. So, in order to do that, we need to be aware of what are those specific situations. It's almost like tagging the different information with where you might use this. For example, one of the questions that I'm trying to answer in life is, how do you lead a good life? This is such a giant question. Where do you even begin? If you think in frameworks, then what you would do is you read through this and you start to tag the information that's related to leading a good life. In here, under Aristotle talks about what makes people happy. So this has a direct relation to how a good life is identified. And his framework is people who lead a good and successful life have distinct virtues that they all possess. Virtue can be found between 2 extremes, and he calls the 2 extremes vices, and in the middle, where it's balanced, it would be a virtue. So there's a whole table of virtue and vices. For example, between boastfulness, understatement, there is truthfulness. So if you want to lead a good life, you want to be truthful, not boastful or understated. Both are not so good. Or there's, at the 2 extreme, cowardice and rashness, and where you want to be in order to live a good life is being courageous. So that is his frameworks. But of course, that's not the only way to look at this idea of how to lead a good life. And under the arbitrary, I think, somewhat arbitrary category of literature, there is Marcel Proust. And he also looks at, how do you lead a good life? And to him, it's about the meaning of life. And so he explores 3 different meanings, which are social success, love, and art. So the trick is not to memorize all of these different frameworks, but to put them into context. Start to tag your ideas. Start to tag frameworks to situations where you might use them. Now, of course, it's going to be so much mental resources needed if you do have to do this in your brain, which is why humans invented how to write. We can literally extend our brain onto some sort of thinking tool, right? Tools for thought. Pen and paper is great. You can use Obsidian, which I use as well, to put these ideas down and to tag things and not to have to remember them in your brain all the time in order to free up more space for you to think and to notice new things. And in the end, you'll also be able to come up with your own framework. So check that out, and I'll see you in the next one.